Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June edition of Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise. My name is Alia Gina from the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary, and I'm representing the Trico Foundation Social Entrepreneurship Center. And I'm really excited to be hosting this session we lovingly call AMAASE. Before we get started, and in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, I would like to honor and acknowledge Mohiniskis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, with the historical Northwest Métis homeland within. Finally, we acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and not, who live, work, and play on this land, and who honor and celebrate this territory. Together with you, the participants at today's event, we respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. We have many attendees from all over today, so please share where you're joining us from in the chat. For those of you who have tuned into AMAASE session before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome. We're really happy that you're here. This is truly an Ask Me Anything style event with no formal agenda beyond offering answers to your questions about social entrepreneurship and sharing other resources you might consider. That said, we rely on audience questions to drive the session's content. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat right now or throughout the session, and we'll get started after some brief panel introductions. Don't worry, there's no such thing like a silly question. If you feel like you have a question, you're not the only one, and so we encourage you to ask it. I'll also be inviting you to unmute because a verbal question is always a little more friendly and warm and easier to answer. And so we'd ask you to do that. But if you prefer, don't worry, no pressure. You can send it to me or in the chat generally, and I will ask it to the panel. So since this is an interactive session, we encourage you to turn on your camera. We also encourage you to engage in conversation and share resources with each other in the chat, because this is also an opportunity for us to learn from you. And we're here to learn, so why not share the resources? And please note also that we're recording this session because we have a YouTube channel where these are uploaded. And so if you've ever missed a session that you really wanted to attend, they are on YouTube, and we'll put that link in the chat shortly. So as a reminder, though the panel represents many years of experience within the social entrepreneurship ecosystem, we'd like to remind you that we're not able to give legal advice. That being said, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their organizations. So first, I'll call on Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany. I'm with Trico Charitable Foundation, and we work with organizations that are exploring social entrepreneurship through a number of different programs. My focus is the ASSESS program, which provides coaching, training, and tools and grants to charitable organizations that are exploring social entrepreneurship. Training and tools are available to any type of organization, just grants to charitable organization, just to flag that. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Next, we have Alex, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Laidlaw from Calgary Foundation. Calgary Foundation is best known for the work it does in all parts of community, mostly with our grant making. So we're a well-known grantor in the charitable sector. But my work at Calgary Foundation is in impact investing. So we have a program that does loans for charities and nonprofits who may need more flexible financing than they can get from a conventional financer, or who might not otherwise have access to financing just because the creditworthiness from a bank's perspective might not be there, but we might see it. So that's the work that I do. Glad to be part of the conversation today. And thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here too. Next, Meredith, please.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Meredith. I'm the community manager for the Social Innovation Hub. The Social Innovation Hub is operated by Innovate Calgary, which is the innovation company of the University of Calgary. We support social innovators to launch and scale social change, and we do this through program offerings. So we offer an incubator program, one-on-one coaching and mentorship. We also provide access to capital through the USEED Social Impact Fund. And we have a sparkly, shiny new physical space as well that you can come work out of that we've just opened. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Next, I'd like to call on Jeff.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Jeff. I work at Momentum, which is a community organization here in Calgary that is very focused on trying to have our local economy work better for everyone. That's our big goal. And then one of the ways that we do that is we work with people to start their own small business. And we often provide microloans to some of the entrepreneurs that we work with. And then we also work to try to grow social enterprises. And we do that primarily through hosting what's called the Be Local Network, which is a network of about 400 plus businesses, all locally owned and committed to having a positive community impact. And we host an event called Social Venture Institute that's Alberta wide. And that's really trying to create a peer learning and network building opportunity for nonprofit and for-profit social ventures or social enterprises in our province.
Cool work that you're all doing. Okay, last but not least, Dan, please.
Hey everybody, in addition to the work that Brittany described, I'm with the Trico Foundation, and we study social entrepreneurship, we write about it, and we try to help build the ecosystem in nurturing social entrepreneurship.
Excellent. I love the chat that's already going. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so now we're ready for why we're all here. Ask us a question. I have one in the chat that I will pose. It is, how would you describe how a social enterprise works as a business? How can you still make money when you're trying to solve a social problem?
So we often talk to organizations about social enterprises having the piece around balancing the social and entrepreneurial and bringing sort of those two worlds together that can cause some pressure points or can cause some or show signs of momentum. And so it's ultimately about using a business model for social good. And the piece around finding the customer group that makes sense for you, because you're ultimately filling a customer need and solving a problem for them, the job that they need done for them. And so we work with organizations a lot about understanding how these pieces come together. So if we do have a social aspect to our mission, how is that impacting our ability to make money? Or vice versa, if we have an entrepreneurial piece to our mission, how does that impact our social good? And I think a lot of the time people think that if you're doing social enterprise, you're automatically all of a sudden charging like your beneficiaries, for example. So, hey, we work with this group and now we're going to charge them for our services. And that's not necessarily the case. So maybe there's a different market to look at. Maybe there's something, a different avenue to explore, a different customer group, but really building off the skills of an organization and the work that they're doing. And the other piece I would say is sort of that piece around balancing is as you do start looking at, we want to have an entrepreneurial aspect to our business. How is that going to impact our greater organization? Those are really important questions to have early stage, right? So in some models, it can be quite difficult to make a profit, right? Like it depends on what the focus of an organization is. And I always use the example of like employment social enterprises. So with employment social enterprises, maybe you're working with a population that has barriers to employment, and you might need to have additional supports to work with that group. The other thing is with employment social enterprises, it's expensive to keep training new people, right? It's expensive to bring new people in and train them. And so some of those pieces may cause entrepreneurial pressure points. And so we talk to organizations a lot about like what their goals are, and then what are the pressure points that exist within their models, and having those conversations early days. So if your goal is, I want to make a bunch of profit and money, one, you want to look at how does that align with our social mission and the good that we want to do. But two, it's also to look at like, is this even viable in the model that we have? So we work with a lot of organizations around sort of those pieces and understanding how you can bring them together and what your goals are for bringing them together and what makes sense for your organization.
Just one thing I would add is to think about social enterprise that it is on the spectrum of like how much profit or how much business you want to pursue, very similar to what Brittany said. So even a nonprofit based social enterprise model still has to be paying attention to money pretty much all the time. So like regardless of the organizational form, for-profit, not-for-profit, co-op, it's really critical that like cash is king. You need to be able to generate enough revenue to be able to cover all costs. And if it's a nonprofit, you're probably going to end up calling that a surplus. And if it's a for-profit, then it's your profit. But even in the nonprofit model, it doesn't mean that there can't be the responsiveness to whomever your customer is, whatever your revenue source is, really paying attention to like how to ensure that the revenue is adequate, not only just to get by and make ends meet, but actually to be sustainable over the longer term. And so you can have a relatively healthy income statement and hopefully, if successful enough, a relatively healthy balance sheet.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question has been like answered really well. Maybe the only other thing I could think to mention is just that, you know, social enterprise, like Jeff said, it is on a spectrum, and it's like it's not a legal structure necessarily, just to reinforce that point, right? So like when we're talking about social enterprise, we're really talking about like using business tools to solve social problems. That doesn't necessarily mean like a legal business structure. So
Thanks so much. Gurmul, you put a question in the chat, but I'll invite you to come off camera if you're willing and able.
Yeah, I can ask the question. So I basically asked, how can recent grads be inspired to pursue social entrepreneurship? And what resources are there for early career to mid-career professionals?
Well, there are some pretty great examples of students that have started social enterprises, both for-profit and more than not-for-profit models. And some of those are right here in Calgary, like Haskayne grads, MRU grads. So there's nothing necessarily like holding back like recent grads from getting going, in the social entrepreneurship space, whether that's like a full-time source of income or a side hustle. So yeah, to not like shy away from a leap as possible. And then in terms of, there are some well-established social enterprises that have more scale, and whether they're not-for-profit or for-profit, doesn't matter, but they could be the type of business that you look for your first job. So you can start like learning on the job as well. So I think that's important. And then other resources, I would say that some of the organizations represented here, like checking out the Trico website. So there's local resources, and then there's like a massive plethora of resources when you start getting down the Google rabbit hole of social enterprise. So I always like Stanford Social Innovation Review, I think, is a great resource for social enterprise writing that's not necessarily having to read a whole book. And it's relatively accessible. Like some of their articles are available online totally for free, but even like an Indigo chapters, whatever the heck it's called now, sells Stanford Social Innovation Review. So you can like flip through copies at Indigo and just check it out to inspire you what could be possible. It's a good resource as well.
Gurmul, I think it's interesting that you've asked this question because you've done a lot of work in this space and you've had some interesting internships. I might actually ask you, what cool internships or projects have you discovered and worked on that you want to share with the group? Because I think you've done a few cool things, but you're thirsty for more, and I get that.
Yeah, so I think it depends on what stage you're at. Usually if you're a grad within 1 year, you can do competitions, like case competitions. So I did a couple through the Haskayne Consulting Club. There is also something called the Calgary Hacks that you can do as well as a student, which is really good competition. Some you have to be an undergrad and some you can just be a recent grad. So I started very small with like local hackathons. And then I found out about the Hunter Hub Launchpad program, which is really great. That was a great program to start with. I also found out about the social innovation program through you, Alia, several years ago, which I would recommend to any recent grads. Now it's called Propel Impact. And I'm actually working as a summer analyst with Innovate Calgary through them. So I think that would also be a good program. And after that would be more leaning into like startup TNT and platform Calgary once you have like 2 to 3 years of experience. And then further down the line, I think plug and play would be something to explore in 500 Global. So there is a process, and the only way I really found out is by just being part of the ecosystem and going to conferences like Inventures and learning more about just different organizations like Haskane's program or MRU's Launchpad program, and even the Trico Center. And then now I'm involved with Innovate and I see all that they do. So I just wish I had went to more events when I was a recent grad, so I could just be part of that ecosystem earlier. But that's the process that I would outline. But there was a great answer given by Jeff as well. So,
Any panelists want to add anything or ask him a question?
I would just add in terms of getting inspired. So I think all of these sources that you discussed are great examples. But another source is also just, is there a social enterprise that inspires you, that gets you excited, that you can talk to? I find that people really like to talk about what they're passionate about, especially if there's like coffee involved. And so the ability to talk to someone who's been there, done that, and learn a bit about their journey. I talk to organizations a lot about sort of this learning from others and their experiences, but then also taking it back and figuring out what makes sense for you and what makes sense on your own social enterprise journey, if that's something that you want to lead yourself, or is there a really cool link of somewhere you'd actually like to get involved and a project you'd like to work on.
Yeah, very cool. I wonder, like, as students, if a social enterprise catches your eye, what's been your experience? Do you just reach out? Are they as receptive? Any follow-up questions, Gormal, or anything you want to share?
yeah, I can do a follow-up. So I've noticed if you're further down in your journey of education, like say you're a grad student or someone doing their doctoral thesis, it's really easy to reach out because you can even incorporate a company or add into your thesis project and write a paper on it. Maybe for an undergrad and honors degree, an undergrad thesis project might be helpful. So if you're doing it for some sort of project or case study, I think it's easier to reach out. I do know that MyTax provides grants on these kind of projects as well, so it's something to explore. But I think it needs to be in combination with some sort of deliverable. Like you don't want to just reach out just because you're curious. You want to align it with some sort of goal or deliverable, and then it's kind of easier to work in partnership. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, that's a really good point. At the Haskane School of Business, we're kind of doing that through getting social enterprises to put in projects so that we can expose students in their capstone classes. So we kind of sneak it in there so that people realize that social enterprises don't always have to be a category of their own, all alone in their own world, but are part of the regular ecosystem. So you can do both. You can have it a particular subsection, but you can also put it into the mainstream. Thank you so much, Gormal. Kira, I saw that you put a question in the chat. Would you like to vocalize it instead?
Yeah, I can speak it out. So my question is, can you provide a few examples of for-profit artists and designers that have created a big social impact and what made them successful? I'd be really interested in folks in Edmonton and Calgary, especially.
So I don't have a local one and I don't remember the name, but Dan, do you remember the person that we had we brought them in, I think, for Beakerhead that was doing the clothing and they were from the Netherlands. Do you remember who that was?
Oh yeah, I'm actually blanking on them though. They were amazing. They created some clothing that told you about the environment that you're in and provided you readings and stuff like that, and could provide moisture and things like that.
Yeah.
I forget what his name was.
Ida, our colleagues on the call, and I'm just going to ask Ida, can you Google it and put it in the chat for us if you can find that link? Because that was a really cool example of someone working in the art field and using really innovative techniques around fashion, but I just can't remember the name right now.
You're looking for something particularly in the art space, or you're just curious in general if we've seen the cross section?
I'm looking specifically in the arts and design space because that's where I am at the moment. It could also be like educational art potentially, as that's some of the sorts of things I dabble in.
Arts adjacent, I guess. One other one would be Squatch Eyes Lodge in Vancouver. So what they do is they've actually created a hotel. And what they do is they offer residencies to Indigenous artists and allow them for space and sale and everything like that. So adjacent, but a really interesting example as well. And Ida did put in the chat box the organization I was thinking of, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with Squatch Eyes Lodge, but they're doing some really neat things as well in the Indigenous art space.
Yeah, I was just thinking through, like, I think this is a really interesting question. And I was like thinking through the examples of impactful artists in my head, and like, just like the levers of change that they're using to create that impact. And just interesting to think about, like, yeah, like creating impact through arts and creating impact through, you know, advocacy in the arts sector, and sort of like some of those different pathways that folks have taken. Someone who might be interesting for you to connect with is Katie O. I'm not sure if you're familiar. So she is a beautiful person, sculptor. I've put a link to the center that she runs in the chat. It's just outside of Calgary. It's a really quite a beautiful space there. And she's done some really interesting social impact work and education work through the center. So yeah, would encourage you to connect with her. That's an example that comes to mind.
Yeah, another, I guess, adjacent area would be public art. So large scale arts in the public realm. If you're familiar with any artists that use that to tell stories about environment or other social impact areas, that would be also helpful.
Like, I think a lot of the Indigenous artists have they're using art to tell the story of colonization and then reconciliation. So I think there's lots of inspiration to take from Indigenous based artists in the Alberta context. So, thinking of someone like Jason Carter, when you mentioned like the public commissions, it's also a good business move, right? If you're able to get public commissions, it can be lucrative. So like most artists being self-employed, and then a lot of them struggle, like thinking about the art both as the business and how to make the art as viable economically as possible, and then how it can also have the social impact and sort of the blended model that we talked about before. It's sometimes hard to do both, but it's really important. And I think some of the Indigenous artists in our community are probably the leaders in the space of, like Jason Carter as just one example, right? He's like pretty commercially viable, and he's willing to reflect his Indigenous heritage in his art. That's important to him, with like the modern, like really modern take that he does. So, and there are quite a few others, but that's just what came to mind when you asked the question, Kira.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that I would caution other people that are interested in art and business is that the arts community doesn't want to hear so much about your business side. They really want you to focus on being an artist. So just something I found out the hard way, potentially useful to others here.
Just building on Jeff's point, there's Coloring It Forward, which actually provides coloring books that celebrate Indigenous narratives, which is a great Alberta-based example. There's C-Space, which actually provides this collective work area and other initiatives to support art. And then I put in the chat, there's actually a cover story, ironically, Jeff mentioned Stanford Social Innovation Review, where they're talking about how art can actually play a role or not in the circular economy. So those are some good starts as well.
Thank you. I'll just pick up too on what you said, Kira, because I think I mentioned it kind of earlier. So sometimes you get pushback because it's like, oh, you're going to start charging your beneficiaries or something like that. But I think there's another piece to the conversation as well. So is there a different audience? Is there something you can do? But also the connection between how the entrepreneurship or the business aspects may actually allow you to take your social mission further. So can I have more impact because I am generating revenue, and that allows me more space to do the social good or impact the social issue that I'm wanting to. So it can be a hard conversation, right? For sure. But I think there can be this like pushback. I come from a sociology background, and like 11 years ago when I went in and I was chatting with my like sociology friends about how I was working for Trico, it was pretty much, oh, so you want nonprofits and charities to do what the government should be doing, right? It was kind of like the pushback at the time too. So I think no matter what, there's always pushback. But sometimes it's also talking and letting organizations understand how maybe the business aspects allow you to work with another audience or allow you to work with somebody in a different way. A good example is like something like an employment social enterprise, where maybe it is an organization that supports people with addictions and is able to provide them with housing or provide them with certain supports, but maybe by starting up a social enterprise and operating a construction business or some type of business, they're actually able to provide them with training, and they're able to provide them with wages, and they're able to act as a reference for them. So it can also be like another way in which organizations can have social impact on the group that they're serving in a new or a different way too, right? Like it's not a one size fits all. It's really determining what are my goals and what route is going to get me towards those goals. And sometimes that's social entrepreneurship, right?
Question for the panel. I think there is a theater in Calgary that's kind of doing some of this work, but I feel like I might be the wrong one. But is it Downstage Theater or something like that that's trying to become a social enterprise? I see some nodding, Jeff. So it is the right one. Do you know?
Downstage Theater is a good example, and then Evergreen Theater actually is another one as well.
I'll find that one. And Alex.
And I would just say Jane's not on the call today, but she actually works with quite a few arts organizations in Edmonton. So Jane Bisbee, or even looking at who they've funded, I think there's actually quite a few arts and like theater groups and stuff like that in the list. So even on their website, you might want to look at their list. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
And Jeff already popped that list right in a link to that list in the chat. So you've got that one there to click. I was going to say something similar in that arts organizations, it's interesting, especially, well, from my lens, we're working in the charitable sector, working with at that charity or organizational level rather than at the individual artist level. Social enterprise is part of arts organizations. It's embedded. There's like a revenue generation model that's always been there. And artists have been very scrappy in finding ways to fund their work in that way. And it's interesting to have those conversations because I think social enterprise at times can feel like this new concept, but it's not new. This has been happening a long time, and arts has been doing it in a lot of ways for a very long time. We've worked with organizations like C-Space, which Dan mentioned, as well as National Music Center, Theatre Calgary. All of those organizations have participated in social finance to help fund some of their work. So it's interesting thinking about the different levels of what social enterprise means in arts. There's different shapes and scales when you're looking at it from a organizational lens versus kind of an individual artist lens as well.
Kira, anything you'd like to clarify or ask a follow-up question? Did we help you or get you more confused?
That sounds like a lot for me to look up. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, audience. Next question. From our questions that came through the registration form, we have, how do we attract and secure more like-minded investors? I don't have any clarity on that, but does someone want to hypothesize and maybe share an answer?
Yeah, I guess I'd be curious if by like-minded, given the content of our call today, they maybe mean impact investors. And so the question being sort of like what are impact investors looking for as they're assessing investments?
Let's go with that.
Alex?
How do you find impact investors?
Sure, yeah, I can take a stab at maybe a first thought on this, which actually builds off my last thought in conversation with Kira about there's a difference if you're an individual artist looking to start an enterprise versus a large scale charitable organization looking to do something entrepreneurial. this landscape is very varied in terms of the types of things that can be considered social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, and just as varied is the types of investors who are looking to get involved in projects. So it can become part of that challenge is finding the right fit, finding the people who are interested in the work that you are doing. Alberta Seed has a tool called AMAASE that helps with navigating the ecosystem and figuring out, this is what I do, who's funding that, who's working in that area, and that might be a good place to start for figuring out how to find like-minded investors. Because I think that the biggest challenge isn't, hey, we both are interested in some kind of impact. I think there's lots of investors out there interested in impact investing. There's lots of enterprises out there interested in doing something impactful. It's more that alignment of familiarity or fit with what the investors are looking to achieve and with what the enterprises are looking to do.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think one of the things that with the organizations we work with is really focus on understanding what their goals are for their ventures, so that when they do approach investment, they approach the right type of investment for where they're at and who makes sense, but also are really grounded in what they kind of like the direction to go. Because sometimes when you get an investment, this was Kathy Clark talked about this, but it can be like you're in a canoe and they're looking for a speedboat. So having like similar expectations about the direction and also what control looks like for the organization. So what are you willing to give up, or what do you want that relationship to work with? And I think having all of those conversations and being really grounded in what you'd like to see in that allows for more fruitful organizations and allows you to kind of be really smart with almost like that matchmaking process. And then the other thing is, we've talked about this before, but if there is an organization that you're looking at and considering for investment, hopefully their website outlines kind of what they're looking for, and they're very straightforward. I know at Trico Foundation, we've tried to be really clear about what we can and what we can't fund, and sort of what gets us really excited or gets our funding committee really excited, because I never want to waste anybody's time. And so I would rather have it very upfront, we don't even use an application process. We use an idea submission process that should take under 10 minutes for organizations as a first step for looking for a grant through us. And it's because we're busy, but you're also busy. And so the last thing we want to do is have an organization spend time on something that isn't a fit. And so oftentimes kind of doing that legwork and looking at, well, what is this organization saying, and determining, could it potentially be a match, and then reaching out to them makes the most sense. So I think though it all comes back to like being really grounded in what your goals are for your organization, so that then you know what you're looking for with a partner, essentially, right? Like somebody that will work with you.
Just to build on Brittany's point, absolutely, you need to understand the possible investor and have a conversation with them. But a big believer in actions speak louder than words. So if you could look at their website and see who they've invested in, and then speak to those investees directly and see how they found what this investor was like in terms of putting their money where their mouth is and their support, or even other fellow social entrepreneurs that you really respect and admire, reach out to them and say, who funded you? What were the process? What worked? What didn't work? And use that kind of intel to figure out who a match is, beyond just any fund, talking the talk.
That's some really great advice. Meredith, I'm going to put you on the spot here. One other thing that your team does is USeed. Do you want to talk about that a little more?
Yeah, it was funny. I was thinking about that and wondering sort of how far this question extends. But I could sort of, as an extension, share just a little bit about like some of the things that like USeed is looking for, and some of the things that might make a company like aligned or not. So USeed is a philanthropic fund. It's a family of funds. Our team manages the USeed Social Impact Fund. It is an investment fund, so it's not grants. We are looking for those funds to be returned ultimately. And this fund in particular is sort of at the pre-seed stage. So we're typically looking for you to have like a little bit of traction with your business already, some sort of like, I mean, depending on the industry and sort of the development pathway, but typically some like interested first customers. It is helpful if you've done some work around your like really understanding your impact and the measurement of that as well. So as you know, as an investor who cares about both the social impact and obviously who's looking for the funds to be returned to us, so cares about sort of like the economic viability. If you have done some existing work around trying to understand that impact, then that can be helpful for us, like in the process of sort of like going through that negotiation and due diligence and those sorts of things. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted me to speak to on that?
Actually, I was going to maybe bring it up on the flip side and slightly tangential, but if you want to get in, if as a student you're interested in learning how to invest, there are a couple of programs, one that Gourmand mentioned, which is Propel Impact, which we put in the chat, but there's also a Haskayne U Seed Fund that kind of ties into the work that Meredith does with her team and is part of that family. So as a student, you can take this course and it's kind of led by finance faculty members and an advisory committee that kind of walk you through what it's like to be an investor. So that's pretty cool too. And then there's also the Calgary Social Value Fund, which is also part of a national organization that's student focused. And so students kind of run this fund with some supervision, but they do the fundraising and they decide who to invest in. And I think some of the people on our call have participated or overseen some of those. I see some head nods if you want to add in a little.
There's so many emerging forms of social impact investing or social finance. And that's why I think, Alex, your point around like checking out AMAASE so that it can be a little bit of the one-stop shop of what's out there. Because as soon as people started sharing, I was like, oh, and then there's also Futurepreneur. And like I just started thinking about all the different potential capital sources. So I think that's why having like a resource for Alberta is important, just so those resources can be in one spot. So anyone looking for funding or financing it doesn't have to be going on Google searches.
Google can definitely get overwhelming.
Hmm.
So yes, AMAASE is in the chat so that you can access that resource. Okay, any last comments on this topic before we go back to the audience and see if they have a question for us? Okay, another question from our bucket of questions. So what can the Alberta ecosystem learn from other jurisdictions about social enterprise? What's happening in other places that we need to catch up on here in Alberta?
I can go first. One thing that I think where we're starting to make progress is I've always looked at Quebec with a bit of envy because they have the Chantier, which is a big social like basically a huge social finance fund and is incredibly well capitalized, originally from the federal government years and years ago, and then has grown and has proven to be sustainable over the last 15 years. And as part of the Chantier is like there's close to 20 different organizations in Quebec that provide micro business loans. So similar to what we do with sole entrepreneurs, but like across Quebec, there's 20 different organizations that provide small under $10,000 loans for startup, oftentimes for people with limited credit or inability to access any other form of more mainstream business financing. And all of that was capitalized by the Chantier. So I think the key learning from Quebec is like the ecosystem there. They use the language of more of the social economy ecosystem, and it's a little different than what we would describe as more of the social enterprise ecosystem, but with an incredible amount of overlap. The key learning is that capital is key. And so I'm optimistic that with the rise of the funds that we have in Alberta and even something like the Social Enterprise Fund only being just over 10 years old now, and then now with the growth of social finance nationally, that we could see the capacity grow in our province. And then with more capacity, ultimately the social enterprise space could have more clout or more influence and just be higher profile. So I feel that's been a gap in Alberta, is that oftentimes with capital comes capacity, with capacity comes clout, and we lack a lot of clout or influence in terms of thinking about the economic and social impact that's created by businesses, social enterprise, social venture, however it's going to be defined, without getting caught up in the definitional angst and being open to the diversity of definition of what does count as sort of a social enterprise. We can have much more influence as the ecosystem really grows. And I think capital is key to that future growth.
I think I found the link about what you're talking about, but the Government of Quebec website is only in French. So you might have to use Google Translate unless you're bilingual. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I can't speak to Quebec, but we've looked at a lot of other jurisdictions that are announcing social entrepreneurship strategies. And I actually find that Alberta is surprisingly as advanced, if not more advanced. I find, as Jeff hints, a lot of it seems to be bogging down in definition debates, as opposed to this wider discussion of just having an inclusive conversation about everybody who wants to use business models to serve social needs, but also aspirational. Like, what are we trying to do here in terms of, push the idea of not being driven only by profit maximization, and there's all these other kind of things you can do for fully harnessing the potential of business models to serve social need. And I also find a lot of them, although they are spending a lot of money, they're not data informed. They don't really have these deep data driven trackings of the journey of social entrepreneurs. So I'm very proud to say that Trico Foundation is actually doing some initiatives with local social entrepreneurs where we actually track them longitudinally and frequently about their needs and how they're responding to them. And we're actually working with the Haskayne Center on those initiatives and possibly others. So I actually think Alberta is an inch away from being a leader, not only on the approach to social entrepreneurship, but actually the data collection that finally informs evidence-based decision-making as how to actually grow social entrepreneurship.
Jeff, do you want to mention the link you put in?
The link, it's just English. So SEDNet has
cool.
a
Thank
brief
you.
description of the chantier on their site being English, and then it does link to the chantier site, and then it translates relatively well, the chantier site, when you do English translate.
Sweet. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go to our next question. We see a lot of social enterprises being typical business models like percentage of profits or buy one, give one. How do we get people to think about other models, and how do you get there, and how do you introduce those topics when you're talking to budding social entrepreneurs?
So at Trico, one of the things that we really focus on is talking about the potential of social entrepreneurship rather than kind of being stuck in the definition or more traditional models. But having said that, you can have great impact using some of those traditional models. But what we've really worked on is working with organizations about how creative and how far you could go with this space, what you could do, the different ways that you can bring the social and entrepreneurial together, and how far we could take this conversation. So that piece around potential for us, and a big piece of that is actually introducing organizations to these really creative blends or these really powerful business models that people have designed to have the social impact that they want them to have. So we talk to organizations a lot about, these are different ways organizations have done that. This is sort of how it's pushing the envelope or how it's overcoming some of those pressure points of bringing these pieces together. But I think very much so what you see in the news and what a lot of people are talking about is TOMS, or so the buy one, give one models, or we donate a percentage. And then you get people who are like, this isn't social enterprise, this is social enterprise, big definition debate. For us, it's just about the different ways in which you can have impact. And the other thing is if you see an organization that maybe is using a more traditional model, hey, that's what they know, that's what they've seen, but that doesn't mean that's not like that's the only thing they're ever going to do. So one, they might be able to achieve their impact goals through that model. But the other thing is that organizations can evolve over time and change how they're having impact or the different ways in which they are having impact. And so I use the example a lot around an organization called 10 Tree, which started out selling t-shirts and hugely debated when we asked organizations about what their favorite social enterprise was. Because some people would be like, this is the best, this was 10 years ago, but this was the best social enterprise ever. And then others would be like, this is not social enterprise, because what it was is you'd buy a t-shirt and they would plant 10 trees, right? And so for us, it wasn't an example that got us super excited, very basic model, also a model that has pressure points because you have to be good at two things. You have to be good at planting trees or having a partner who plants trees. You have to be good at making apparel. And you've also got two kind of customer types, right? You've got people who are there for the t-shirts and you've got people who are there for planting the trees maybe. So pressure points in their model, but it's really interesting, like 10 years later, even though it's a model that has pressure points and could be seen as sort of more traditional, it's been hugely successful. And the way that they've evolved over time is fascinating. So they started off, hey, we plant trees, but as they've developed and they've grown their business, they've actually changed their impact as they went. So something that they started to do was their customers were saying, we don't want you to make t-shirts on any old type of material. Like you've said that your mission is to sell t-shirts to do climate change. Why are we sort of using the cheapest t-shirts out there? So they started using recycled materials or more environmentally friendly materials. They've started up a, like similar to Patagonia, like if you return your t-shirt to them, you get a discount. So that keeps it out of the landfill. New apparel, they've started planting trees around the factories that produce their t-shirts to offset greenhouse gas emissions. And they've also signed on to only working with factories that go by their code of ethics. So a lot of evolution as you go. And what's really great about them is they even acknowledge that. The article that I'm thinking of, they actually say, you know, there was probably an easier way to plant trees than to start an apparel brand, right? So this idea of how you can evolve over time. So I think sometimes people get down on, hey, you're using this traditional model, but I think it's about like introducing them to the potential of this space and using examples and organizations that are doing some really creative things, and then watching how they evolve over time, because you're not stuck in the model that you choose. Sometimes that's the model that makes sense for you at that time. And it may evolve, it may not, but it's giving organizations the space to grow into the impact they want to see and they want to have.
What was the original question? Because I have a thought, but I want to make sure it fits with the original question. Because Brittany got me thinking about it.
I think you should just go for it. But basically the question was social enterprise structures and which how do you nudge
relevant.
people?
It's relevant because when Brittany mentioned the evolution. And so I think it's really important for anyone to think about social enterprise as a verb, not a noun. And so that like to not get overly focused on the structure, like thinking about like, how do you try to like solve a problem and then in a way that's financially viable. And so for us at Momentum, like we tend not to describe ourselves as a social enterprise, but you know, we're kind of enterprising. And an example where we still have the two customer model that you described, Brittany, for a long time, like that's still core to how we do business. Like, so we have government contracts where we compete with the private sector to get those contracts. We can run those contracts when we're effective, when we achieve our outcomes. We can run those on a bit of a margin because we're competing to get those contracts with the private sector. So we try to build a margin in, know our full costs. If we perform well, we can create a surplus because we're nonprofit. We call it a surplus, not a profit. And so that's a key, but then that customer is the person, the participant in those training programs. So two customer model. So then over the last few years, we started doing more research and learning more about, especially because of participant experience, around the challenges with private career colleges. And then we started thinking like, well, how could we maybe do our training differently where we're not reliant on the paying customer only being government, because government's the primary funder for our employment training. And could we do a different model that kind of blends those customers together, but still provides training that is accessible from a cost standpoint and doesn't have the exorbitant costs that a lot of private career colleges have that are financed through student aid debt, that a lot of times people take on that debt, they don't get the job that they were aiming for, and it creates a financial burden. So we just launched like our test. We don't know if it's going to work well, but it is a new test of a new training model with a very different revenue model where the learner is paying some of the tuition, but they're paying the vast majority of their tuition after they get employed in their field, which is called an income share agreement. So we're committed that we're going to try our very best to support them to get a job in technology, and then they will pay back their tuition over a 2-year period once they're employed. So I just posted a news story from a couple of weeks ago on that program, and it just launched this week, and we have a full cohort of 14 learners. And so it's a new approach, but we're trying to address that problem of how do we have employment training that can lead to a good career track job but not be a financial burden for the learner. So that's I think just an example of the evolution kind of approach. But it's still, we're not focused on the form. Like we can operate this program within our current structure as a not-for-profit. That's not a limiting factor for us.
That's super cool. I've heard of people ideating around this kind of model, and it's really nice to see that it's happening in some places. Thanks for sharing that article. Okay, audience, questions for us. How does one go about finding a mentor in social entrepreneurship, or someone that is working in social entrepreneurship or enterprise?
Okay, I'm talking a lot today, but that's okay. So one of the things, so if you're looking for a mentor, I think the key piece, like whether you're looking for a mentor or somebody who might be on an advisory committee or someone that's going to help sort of guide you and work with you through your social enterprise, is really getting clear on your goals, which we've talked about quite a bit, but thinking through what do you need out of that relationship and what is that person able to give? Because you want to be on the same page. We don't do sort of mentorship relationships at Trico. One of the things we actually talk a lot about is industry specific knowledge and friendly wise skeptics. So is there somebody that's been there, done that you can learn from and chat to, and maybe even push it a step forward in terms of could they act as a friendly skeptic? So looking at, is there an outside voice or a number of outside voices that make sense for your needs, that they're friendly, they're wise, so they have that industry specific knowledge, but also they're skeptical. So maybe they'll call you on some of your assumptions, because the hard part is we all hang out with people that we know, like, or that are similar to us. It's just the reality. You kind of, if you're working in an organization, you're generally all there because you're passionate about the same mission. And so sometimes having that outside voice that will poke some holes, but also give you some solutions and work with you is really key. But what I talk to organizations about, whether they're somebody who's acting as a mentor or as a friendly wise skeptic, is providing you sort of some of that support, you also have to look at it through sort of a different lens in terms of what was their experience and what happened with them. Like, what is the advice that they're giving true of? And does that make sense for your organization? So we talk to organizations a lot about like owning your own journey. So at a certain point, taking that info and determining what makes most sense for your organization, because just how it unfolded for them doesn't mean it'll be the same case for you. There's different things that happen. But that piece of kind of filtering it through your own lens of what your goals are are that. And so determining like what sort of you need, and then having a very honest conversation about that person, about kind of what that role looks like and what those expectations are on both sides is really key.
Just to build on Brittany's point, NMATA would be another good resource where you just go look up mentorship. There are actually a lot. I think Futurepreneur has mentorship services. I think Platform offers mentorship services. Corrales, which used to be SheEO, provides mentorship. And then there's also the possibility of just getting a group of local social entrepreneurs that you know and meeting with them on a regular basis and chatting with them through issues and things like that. So you have a lot of options out there in terms of how you actually approach mentorship.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize about NMATA having that section. Apparently, I haven't spent enough time on that website, so thank you. The other way I find interesting to meet mentors is to act as a mentor. So in some of our courses, we do a call for mentorship. And so it's actually an interesting meeting ground where people from different backgrounds will get to meet and, you know, build their own network. So if you see those kinds of opportunities, I will also suggest doing that. Panel, question from you to other panelists?
Meredith, what are you most excited about with the launch of the hub?
That's an awesome question. I was thinking of asking something similar, so thank you.
Yeah, so I think a timely week to be asking that question. So we did a bit of like a soft launch of the Social Innovation Hub end of January, have since been welcoming folks in for kind of programming and to sort of test out the space. We've just this week launched our membership for the Social Innovation Hub. I just onboarded our first member yesterday, which is really exciting for me. One of the things that I really love about this work is like the deeply relational nature of it. And so, yeah, really excited to work with just like a like concentrated, committed group of social innovators, and really think about how to facilitate those like meaningful like connections and dialogue and value add between them as well. So it's a bit of like a personal like excitement. There's lots of really exciting things going on at the Social Innovation Hub. But yeah, for me, that's it right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So cool to have that space on campus and so much activity happening in that quarter. They're calling it a quarter, right? Yeah, innovation quarter. Dan, I feel like you often have a question brimming for our panelists. Can I put you on the spot? Do you have something to ask?
I could ask Jeff for an update on ABC if he's open to sharing information about their journey.
The big news is that Alberta Seed, which really got going because of the federal government working with community to create the social innovation and social finance strategy and wanting Alberta to, in a sense, not be left behind as the Social Enterprise Fund was getting created, is reintegrating with AMAASE Connect, which was originally created when the provincial government toyed with the idea of a social innovation fund provincially. So both initiatives were spurred to be created by government action and wanting community to be meaningfully a part of that action. So they have a bit of a shared history. There's obviously like a massive Venn diagram overlap between social innovation, social finance, and social enterprise. And so the two initiatives of AMAASE Connect and Alberta Seed are what we're calling reintegrating. And so I think it's exciting so that we can do a better job in Alberta amplifying some of the great work that's happening, and not just amplifying of like sharing the stories, so that when someone asks like, hey, what's a cool social enterprise that's art-based, or what's a cool social enterprise that's employment-based, or in Alberta, that we kind of all know some great answers. That part of amplification is important, the storytelling, communication, but also the amplification so that we can try to create more scale of impact, and that there can be not only more examples of social enterprise, but that some of the social enterprises that have the potential to scale their impact and maybe become larger ventures have those opportunities, that they know the right resources that are out there, potentially from a financing standpoint, that they can get the right capital to then help them scale, as an example. So I think it's hopefully an exciting opportunity moving forward to just really focus on how do we amplify the work that's already underway, and that there'll be more work in the future related to social enterprise, social innovation, and social finance, and that we will come up with a name of the new initiative. I'm like borderline beyond obsessed with this. That isn't a name that's not an acronym and really reflects the ends that we're trying to achieve, which is about how do we have an Alberta that works better for more people from an economic standpoint, and that as we develop our province economically, that the social outcomes are core and are built into the economic development activity.
It's a beautiful high note to end on. So before we say goodbye, let's do a roundtable. What's coming up over the next month? What do you want to tell us about? Alex, let's start with you.
On the spot, and we don't have a lot coming up in the next month. A lot of Calgary Foundation's things are skewed towards October will be our busy season with our report back to community and some events to look out for. And I don't have the dates for those yet, but keep your eyes peeled for the fall.
Makes sense. Summer slows down a little bit in Calgary with Stampede and people's involvement with all the things happening around here. Meredith?
Yeah, things upcoming. So immediately, if you want to come check out the Social Innovation Hub, we host a breakfast club at the beginning of every month. First Monday of July is a holiday, so it'll be July 10th is our next one from 9 to 10:30. Don't have the registration link, but would encourage you to come hear from a social innovator, start your week off well, and enjoy breakfast with us. Maybe one other thing I'll mention is we have partnered with Alberta Seed and whatever Alberta Seed will become to host the Social Enterprise World Forum. And so we are just this week getting registration live for that. That will be happening in the fall, October 11th and 12th, I believe. So
Very cool. So should we keep an eye on your website? Are all the events going to be posted there?
yeah, that's right. I'll put a link in the chat to the website.
Awesome. Thank you. Dan, anything to share?
I have an article coming up for Pioneers Post that talks about how the idea of social enterprise is a verb, and the dream of every business being a social enterprise may actually be holding the space back.
Interesting. Jeff?
When's that coming out, Dan?
Hopefully within the next week.
Okay, cool. So that'll be in the Trico newsletter, I'm assuming.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
Oh, you're muted.
I muted myself, sorry. In August, we are hosting Social Venture Institute again with a number of partners. And we're excited that we're taking it to Métis Crossing, which is a neat social enterprise in and of itself in Northern Alberta.
Before I end with Brittany, Ida, can you put in the link for Trico Foundation's newsletter sign up for us in the chat, please? I don't have access to that one. Not that I recall, or it's probably on your website, but okay, Brittany.
So just our regular stuff, we have the majority of our online stuff online. So we have training, tools, videos, everything like that, that is sort of our core curriculum that we do with organizations. On our website, it's free, available 24/7 for organizations that maybe you're looking at some things like we talked about, like potential. We have some videos on that and understanding sort of how creative you can get into this space. And then some like deep dive topics around like testing and understanding where you want to go with your organization. So all of those pieces are online. Ida just sent out the big list, but online and available. And then just check out our website and see what we're working on, and reach out with any questions that you have.
And as Omar put the link, tell your friends, and a reminder to you to attend our July AMAASE, which is on July 12th. And a great big thank you to all of the panelists, all of our audience members. This is my last AMAASE, at least as a host. I'm moving on to a new team, but I'll probably be back as a participant at some time. I'll still be on campus, but trying to do something new and some new initiatives. So again, thank you for the last couple of years of AMAASE, and have a wonderful evening. Happy June, and we'll see you next time.